with the Campbellsville University Senior Seminar Team. Today, our topic of conversation is whether or not the United Nations should consider adding or removing members from the United Nations Security Council. This is a topic that had seemed to be relatively settled until recently, when, as I stated at the top of the broadcast, Russia decided to invade its neighbor Ukraine, and the United Nations finds it very difficult for them to try to address this aggression, in large part because the aggressor happens to be a country that has veto power. So today what we want to do is we want to start out with our three guests from top to bottom on my screen. I have Kylie, Quibe, and Zachary. Thank you guys for joining me. And we want to explore, first of all, the origins of the United Nations. We're going to talk a little bit about what it does. And then we're going to focus more specifically on the UN Security Council and work through this question of whether or not we should consider any revisions to the structure of the UN Security Council. So, Zach, why don't you get us started by giving us a quick rundown of what exactly the United Nations is, and maybe for viewers who are unfamiliar with it, just talk a little bit about where the United Nations came from.
Yeah, so the United Nations is a international organization that was made after World War II. It was made in October of 1945 by the winners of, or not necessarily by the winners, but it was coalition by the winners of World War II, which was the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK. It was pretty much a predecessor of the League of Nations, which was characterized as, not really effective for what it was doing. And the whole point of the UN was to global international peace, like trade relations, good, different kinds of positive interactions between countries around the world. Originally, it started with, I think it was 53 countries. And then as of right now, it is at 193, with countries applying for membership. Throughout the past 77 years that it's been in effect. It was pretty much really good until the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union kind of had stuff going on throughout the whole world, and then after the Cold War ended, after the Soviet Union collapsed, it was pretty reformed again to keep going and fostering peace, relationships between countries, etc.
Yeah, and going off what Zach said, I was also going to add that following World War II, it was the world superpowers that were made into the P5, which is the permanent members of the UNSC. But there were also non-council member states, which is what Zach's talking about when he gets the number with 193 countries. Everybody, well, not to say everybody, but most countries want to be a part of it. And they are kind of granted some privileges, but not as many privileges as the P5 are, or even the other members that are non-permanent members. But there have been changes to the amount of permanent, non-permanent, and non-council members. Those actually originated in the 1960s, which is following the World War II quite a bit. And that was when the shift towards the 10 non-permanent members was initiated. So there's 15 members that make up the UNSC, but then there's non-council member states that fill that larger number. It's people that want to be involved but aren't technically elected to the council every 2 years like the other parties are.
So what exactly does the United Nations do? I mean, what purpose? If every country is a member, it seems like it should have some function that it's performing. What exactly does it do? Kylie, go ahead.
Okay. The United Nations, it's basically, the United Nations as a whole was created to basically police other nations against crimes or for crimes against humanity. It's to eliminate any of the threats that other countries see within their countries that could affect worldwide peace, basically. It's basically a governing body that works together to police other nations, based on powerful alliances of permanent members of the Security Council. So the P5, they're not always at peace. There is some, for lack of better terms, beef there. But they do kind of work together and realize the power of one another. And I think that the United Nations is not only governed based off of like the declarations and all of that, like the rules of the UN, it's also based off of like respect other nations have for each other. So it's just intended to promote peace and help other nations out when they need it.
Quive, can you provide the viewers some examples maybe of specific things the United Nations has done? I mean, it's nice saying, "Oh, we're here for peace, yay!" But is there anything that they have actually done or that they've attempted to do that has had any appreciable effects around the world?
Yeah, sure. So the United Nations has helped to make the world a better place. If we look at the history, it has helped to even bring out some of these nations that were colonized, and it was actually 80 of them. He helped them to be independent, and also UN also promotes democracy around the globe, meaning that he tried to make sure that elections are held in a fair manner where there's no corruption, and also the UN also help making sure that human rights are being respected, meaning women's rights, rights of anybody around the globe. And also, a good example that everybody is very familiar with is the end of apartheid in South Africa. The UN also really played a major role in that determination of the system that existed back in the day, and also in El Salvador, also when they had a conflict war, also the UN sent peacekeepers there and helped to ease the situation. So there's a lot of things that the UN has done to make the world a better place.
You mentioned peacekeepers. Is that something like does the United Nations have an army?
No, it's not necessarily an army, but it's people. It's a body from different nations. For example, Bangladesh has the most peacekeepers. Rwanda, I think, is the third, and those people are sent to various places to ease the situation. For example, right now in DR Congo, Central Africa, there is political instability, and MONUSCO was sent there to at least help ease the tension of the conflict.
Yeah, to add to what Quive said about peacekeeping, I was going to kind of drop some more history on you. United Nations peacekeeping actually began in 1948 when the Security Council authorized the deployment of the UN military observers to the Middle East. And that's from the United Nations peacekeeping website. An article on there kind of discusses like the beginning of it and kind of where it's at now. And it also says that since then, more than 70 peacekeeping operations have been deployed by the UN. The United Nations, one of their main focuses, I would say, is peacekeeping.
It almost makes you wonder. I read a book several years ago about why nations would dispatch troops as peacekeepers. We can think of the story in Rwanda, for example, where Belgian peacekeepers, or in Kosovo, or Bosnia, where Belgian peacekeepers were dispatched. And essentially you find yourself in the middle of a conflict where you have two sides shooting at each other, and really all that can end up happening is you get yourself shot at. It seems to be kind of a harrowing position to be in, but I guess a noble one. So let's come back to our main topic here is the Security Council. Let's come back to the United Nations Security Council. So we have this large body that is effectively every country in the world that wants to be a country in the world for the most part. But then we also have this narrower Security Council. What exactly does the Security Council do, and what is its specific role? Zach, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so the Security Council pretty much helps decide different things that are going on within peacekeeping for the United Nations. It's an elected membership of 15, of countries that are elected throughout. They're not a permanent residency. They are elected, I believe it's through other Security Council members that they are elected to, and they help decide different things between where they need to send peacekeeping troops versus charters that can be passed. And it's pretty much like it's not really like a legislative body for the UN, but it is pretty close to being pretty much close to being a legislative body for the UN to help figure out things that are going on for the UN and what they need to do throughout the organization.
Kylie, you'd mentioned a second ago that there were some reforms in the 1960s. Were those UN reforms? Were those Security Council reforms? What was that about?
The reforms in the 60s, they focused on the UN Security Council and adding more members based off of geographic representation. So basically, I don't know if it originated because there were too many in one geographic area, or if they just wanted to like kind of equal or level the playing field and add more members in different places. But they did make it a rule that you had to have one from each different place. I had it in my research, but I'm drawing a blank now.
Yeah, it's early in the morning.
Yes, so I read your paper. So they had some nation from Asia. They also added some from East Europe, and others from, I forgot. I kind of forgot.
Yeah, so I think it's one from Eastern Europe. I think it's 2 or 3 from Latin America. Mm-hmm. You have the 2 that come from post-colonial sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes.
A couple from Southeast Asia. And this expansion, I guess, was necessary as a kind of counterbalance to what we refer to as the P5, or the permanent members. Why are there permanent members in the Security Council?
Well, they are permanent member in the Security Council simply because of the influence or the impact as the result of the aftermath after the World War II. So they were given this power simply because of the impact in the war.
And the permanent members of the Security Council have more things rather than just always being on the Security Council. They have a big power, which is the veto, which any of the 5 can enact whenever they need to pretty much just deny anything without questionable power against it. To deny like troops being sent out somewhere, peacekeeping operations. They can also deny membership of a new country into the UN as a whole. So they could just run the show pretty much with their permanent membership. Like permanent membership within the UN holds a lot of power that, and relatively they've all been post-Cold War. They've all been pretty coherent in being able to respect others' decisions and not use the veto as much, but they do have that power to be able to, any of the 5, to deny pretty much anything that goes on, just on the fact that they have permanent membership.
Why would other members of the global community agree to this arrangement? I mean, you're basically telling, or you're asking Mexico, or you're asking Spain to participate in a relationship where these 5 major countries have greater power or authority in the global stage than they do. Why would Mexico or Spain or Italy agree to that arrangement?
I think that many countries, it's not that they don't have a choice, but I think that they recognize the P5 as the world superpowers as it is. So even if there was no formal Security Council or United Nations type of organization, that basically list them as the permanent five with the most important. I think that they would still be recognized as the most significant. And there's also the home field advantage there for the U.S. because the UN, what do they call that? The not like the home office, but I'm sorry.
The chamber.
Yes, thank you. That's is it New York, right?
Yeah, it's in New York.
Yeah, so the U.S. has the home field advantage there, but I wouldn't have assumed that it would be any other way because the U.S. tries to like assert their power over other nations and have always done that. So the fact that those 5 nations are the P5 does not shock me whatsoever.
I also agree because I feel like the other countries in the membership for the Security Council, or just all the UN in general, kind of have to abide by those 5 because they were the winners of probably the most destructive war in history. Like especially with the use of nuclear powers, and all of them have nuclear capabilities. So like it's pretty much like you're not going to see the United States go into every country being like, you're going to respect my permanent membership because I have nukes in my back pocket, or you're not going to see any of those countries really at the time do that. But it's always in the back of the mind of someone else of any of the countries joining, like, you should probably like just let me be a permanent member, because the rationality behind the UN is not world domination or I'm going to take control of every country in the world. It's definitely just like a peace kind of thing. Like, we don't want this to happen again because it's already happened twice, and look where it's got us. The UN is definitely just more of a let's just chill out and let's be friends and let's prevent this kind of stuff from happening again. And I think that the countries that are residing in the UN or like that have the membership of the UN kind of just want to respect that as well, especially coming from the winners of this giant war, this worldwide war that's happening. I kind of just want to respect that. But also, I also think that Kyle is correct. And like, they don't really have a choice, pretty much. Like,
So
I mean, they don't have to join, but it's like like, why wouldn't you want to join?
I mean, I get the idea of we should respect that, right? The World War II happened in 1948. I think the American economy in 1947 was half of all global activity. And so the idea that the Americans have a predominant role, that makes sense to me. China, the most populous country in the world, that makes sense to me. But when you look at the world today, so I put up on the screen a graphic of the 10 largest economies in the world. And the top 2, the US and China, those are permanent members. UK, also a permanent member. But then when you go down the list, Japan, third largest economy in the world. Germany, 4th largest economy in the world. India, 6th largest economy, 2nd largest population, will probably be the biggest population during our lifetimes. Brazil in South America as the South American hegemon, and I think it's something like 25% of all economic output in the continent of South America. Why shouldn't those countries that are such a large share of the economy around the world, or Germany, who's so important in the European Union, why wouldn't they want to say, hey, we need to renegotiate this deal here. We want to be a member of the United States, of the United Nations Security Council. And should the world allow that to happen?
Well, negotiations can take place. It's not bad, but one must ask a question of what comes with the power of being a member of the P5. Right now, we are seeing what is happening in Ukraine, and nothing has really have been done despite the sanctions that have been imposed to Russia. And this power of having veto really makes everything very difficult. And to my understanding, and even also Aristotle backed this up in the Republic, is that most states tend to act or going after the interest that fit them. So once you have that control, that power, and every state, for example, when we hear what is happening in the Congo, some people claim that it's Rwanda that is in connection with other states doing what is happening in Congo for resource, coltan and gold. So I feel like what is very important is we can try to see to find a way where we can improve the relationship between the P5 instead of trying to add new members simply because they also contribute they have a lot of contribution when it comes to economy.
I think too that Quiwe was talking about figuring out how to improve the relationships, because it really, ever since the UN started, Cold War happened really shortly after everything that was going on, and relationships have been strained for a very long time, for at least the two biggest and at the time, which was United States and Russia, or the Soviet Union for that point. But I know specifically in my paper, I brought up the idea of adding one permanent member, which would have been like a neutral state, to maybe help become a mediator between the conflicts of the P5. And I know that there has also been, when I was doing my research, there's also been a lot of discussion about pulling France and UK's permanent membership as well, because they have not contributed. They've kind of fallen off the world stage for worldwide, like, not dominance. That's a very aggressive word, but I'm struggling to think about any other non-aggressive word, like worldwide. I'm just gonna use dominance but it's meant to be non-aggressive. Dominance as the United States, as Russia, as China has. There have been multiple states, we mentioned Germany earlier, that has felt like they should be a part of the P5 as well, especially since their reform since World War II has been immaculate with their policies, as they represent themselves as a country. There's different ones like India, Brazil, Japan, and Switzerland have all been forefront runners for addition to the P5, especially India, since India has been growing and growing and growing for the past couple of years, or for the past couple of decades. I know Obama mentioned that, like, India hasn't emerged; it already has. Like, at least on the economic stage that we saw with the GDP, it's already 6, but it has a second, large population, has nuclear capabilities. It also, they also send out the most peacekeeping troops for the UN. So there's like actual consideration for some of these countries being included to the P5, rather than that, to help maybe what Huiwei was saying, help maybe fix or help the strenuous relationship between some of the P5 countries, rather than just adding P5 members just for the heck of it.
I think in my research, I kind of anticipated proving my hypothesis that adding more members to the United Nations, or adding more permanent members to the United Nations Security Council, would promote peace within individual countries. However, I do feel like maybe if you took the power away from the position of being a permanent member, that it might improve the morale of the United Nations as a whole. The Security Council, with the P5 having the veto power and just being kind of respected as being one of the 5 most powerful nations in the world, I think that this kind of gives them too much power, to the point where some of the permanent members go against what the United Nations Security Council recommends. An example of this would be, was it 2003 with the UN or the U.S. invading Iraq? That was an example of it. But then it's happening more recently, even in the 2020s and 2022, when the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine. So you're seeing that again, and I think that that's basically caused by the permanent members of the United Nations having so much respect and getting so much power that they can kind of do what they want and not really have any consequences of it. I know that there is talks about removing Russia from the P5, but since it hasn't happened yet, like, what does that show about the power that the P5 has over the United Nations Security Council?
Yeah, the point that you mentioned about 2003 is well taken. I think the last time a major world power invaded a smaller country was actually when the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. And certainly we had no territorial designs. We had never had any intentions of trying to annex Iraq or annex Afghanistan in the way that Russia has clearly stated and has in fact annexed part of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But when we invaded Iraq, most of the world didn't necessarily support our efforts. And I think too, if my memory's right.
What about Libya?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Libya, when the UN, in accordance with the United States, invaded Libya and killed Muammar Gaddafi. Yeah. That was 2009.
That's true. Although I think the difference between Libya as an example or Korea as an example and something like Iraq or Ukraine is I think most countries in the world probably were on board with Gaddafi. And certainly North Korea or the Korean War was a UN sanctioned exercise. But no, that's a very good point. There certainly would be countries that didn't necessarily approve of the idea of the United States helping overthrow a country and ultimately leading to the execution of its leader. That's absolutely true. And I think many of the UN vetoes from the Security Council have actually been the United States protecting Israel from the Middle East or protecting Israel's actions. So this idea of decreasing, Kylie, if I understand what you're saying, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it. You would suggest that it might make sense. Are you suggesting that it might make sense to remove the special powers of the Security Council, like take away the veto? Or are you suggesting that maybe the permanent membership as a whole could be dissolved?
I think maybe I'm saying both. The permanent membership as a whole could be dissolved, and I don't think that. I mean, I think that it would probably cause chaos. So maybe I would revise that to say the status of being a permanent member should be easier to be revoked. Like, there should be more people enforcing, like, if you don't obey what we say type of thing, then we're not standing behind you. And I feel like because the P5 holds so much power individually and separately, regardless of their relation to the UNSC, they kind of get to do what they want. And I feel like part of the UN should be like, no, that's not going to happen. So I would argue that I think that permanent membership needs to be easier to be revoked.
I agree with that too, because it's not like as the UN you're acting upon people that are like-minded as you and come from the same background, and it's not like you're doing actions based on that. Like, you have to deal with the consequences of being not appreciated by, the whole world. It's not just anybody from the United States, or anybody from the United States and the United Kingdom and France and like all these relatively like-minded people, but you have to deal with the consequences of, like, the Security Council right now, like, has people from all over, or countries from all over the world. It's not literally just all European countries. Like, there's countries from, like we said earlier, like, Middle East, Africa, South America, like, there's some European countries. It's like there's everybody on there that you have to deal with. And if having the permanent membership would be easier to revoke, rather than just saying, like, I'm just going to do what I want because, like, I have this permanent member, like, it should be easier to get. Obviously, if you had it easier to revoke permanent membership, you might want to change the name of a permanent member, because then that's kind of counterintuitive of, I'm a permanent member, but I'm about to lose my permanent membership. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But like, I agree with the point of, like, you shouldn't have too much power that you can just do whatever you want and then veto anybody who's against it. Like, there's a lot of people a lot of countries with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, cultures that, like, can have a say, and it really brings in like the whole world into perspective when you're
Well,
talking about what you're doing.
I feel like those are good points. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to, let's say, a country like the US, who is like the major contributor of financial needs of the UN, like him not having special power or a certain privilege may raise question of permanently being out of the UN's mission. So, with great responsibility comes with authority. So, I'm not sure if US citizens will be okay with this. Just 4 years ago, this argument was alive, and some people suggest that it's not up to the US to police the world, and they cannot be contributing a lot of money, and whereas other states are not even putting the same regarding on their economic state. So I feel it won't be unfair for those states that contribute a lot of funds helping this mission to be carried out.
I didn't even think about that. That's a really good point for the negative consequences for removing permanent membership. Like I didn't even think about that at all.
Yeah, I would really like to see it at least get to a point someday. I don't anticipate this happening in our life, but maybe someday that they could just eliminate the permanent membership altogether. I don't feel like other countries should join the United Nations as a organization to like promote peace and then to basically bully their way over everyone else. Like that's really not peaceful in my opinion, but I understand that would be really hard to take away from. And I would also like to acknowledge that that's a really good point, Quive. Like it would be difficult for the United States, who does fund much of the United Nations operations and all of that stuff. Anyway, it would be difficult to basically say, hey, like y'all are going to have less power, but we probably need more money to accommodate this. That's probably not going to go well with anybody in United States politics. So I can acknowledge that would be definitely an issue. So.
In fairness, that's also part of the logic that France has used to argue for maintaining its permanent position. Because whereas Germany has a larger economy than France, Germany is arguably a bigger leader or more important leader in Europe than France is. The French are the ones who are much more likely to get involved in providing security assistance to African states, because France had a more robust colonial empire in Africa and has closer economic ties to Africa than what Germany did. And so that's an interesting claim that they can make. And after all, it is called the Security Council and not the Economic Council. So I guess there's a certain logic to that. So we're almost out of time. So I'm going to go around the table, although I think I probably have a pretty good sense already. In your opinion, do you think that either the Security Council should be increased or decreased? And also, do you think, not the Security Council, rather the permanent membership should be increased or decreased? Or do you think that the permanent membership should be eliminated altogether? Kylie, let's start with you, because I think that your position, you've already kind of stated it.
Yeah. Before starting this assignment, I kind of anticipated my hypothesis that adding more permanent members to the UNSC would benefit the world in a way. And to be more specific, it would promote peace within individual countries, and separate from international relations, it would encourage peace within individual nations. However, after this discussion and some of my research, I have kind of came to the determination that it would be difficult to encourage the bullying of the P5 to advance into the P6 or 7 or 8. So that would be difficult. I know that there are some benefits to having more members. It could kind of like widen or spread the wealth in a way. You could give more permanent members power if you encourage more people or more countries to try to gain permanent power or permanent membership, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, I kind of would just stick with the conclusion that adding more permanent members would be more detrimental to the UNSC than it would to be beneficial.
Quibe, what's your position?
My position is that I don't think neither should happen. They should not decrease or increase the number of permanent members. What matters and what is meaningful here is the improvement of the relationship between the P5. Because even if you add two other or maybe one, it goes back to the nation of Aristotle. States act upon their interest. And when you give them that power, then you will really discover how the game goes. So also, going to the point of Kylie, where she stated that to be better, maybe uh, to have members elected and maybe being in power for maybe on maybe 5 years mandates and stuff like that. I don't think that also works simply because of the contribution of these other countries. There's no way you can have responsibility of something and not having authority. I mean, in a family, you are responsible. You have responsibility of your children. Therefore, you do have some type of authority over them. So it won't be fair even to the taxpayers of this nation.
Zach, you get the final word.
I stand by my hypothesis, which is that the inclusion of a neutral state would benefit the P5 as a whole, rather than and it would benefit more than just the P5, I think. So the states that I mentioned earlier, Brazil, Japan, India, and Switzerland, they all, of course, except for Switzerland, have either defensive pacts or economic ties to countries that really wouldn't consider them neutral. Switzerland is the only neutral state that we talked about that doesn't have any defense pacts. Literally, their only contribution from their website, from their actions as a country for centuries, has been, we just want to be chill with everybody, and we just want to make sure that we're not taking sides on anything. And that's kind of what Brazil, Japan, and India have been trying to do in terms of their international relationships. Is we just want to be chill, and we want everybody to be able to respect each other, we're not taking any sides on anything. And neutral states are still allowed to condemn other countries for their actions. They don't have to necessarily take part in stuff that's going on. So I still think that it would be beneficial for a neutral country to be elected into the permanent membership to kind of even out the ties between some of the conflicts that's going on, not even just between the permanent memberships, but just between countries as a whole in the UN as well, and having that power of being a neutral country with permanent membership and being able to, I think, Kylie was talking about bullying, but I think they would be able to effectively bully countries into not liking each other, but more of getting along better than if they didn't have this, other member with just as much power as them, trying to be hey, you guys need to shut up and hug it out, or just have some ties to help it out with each other. I still believe that the effectiveness of that would help more than removing or adding just any amount of other countries. I think that those, not necessarily just those 4 countries, but those are the 4 main ones that have been talked about for the past couple decades when I was doing my research, would benefit the whole UN, not just the P5 or the Security Council, as in being able to do stuff that helps with control and international relationships between each other.
Well, I want to thank each one of my guests for joining us here this week. And it looks like we're just about out of time. And I want to thank those of you who joined us at home, either who watched us live during the broadcast or who found this on YouTube or Facebook. I also want to encourage all of you to join us again next week, where our panel will be discussing the Chinese record on human rights, and more specifically, whether or not member states of the international community of the members of the United Nations should be intervening in China domestically as a way of trying to improve their human rights record. So until next time, thank you once again.